We humans have, well, forever been trying to grasp the world beyond what we can see, right? The hidden forces, the big mysteries.
Absolutely. And for ages, we've used myths, symbols, all sorts of things.
Like building maps, yeah.
Yeah.
Maps for navigating that deeper reality. And maybe our own inner journey, too.
Yeah, exactly. They're not just fairy tales. I mean, the sources we're looking at today really show how these stories carry a lot of weight. They give us a language for things that are hard to pin down.
Intangible stuff like transformation.
Transformation, growth, yeah, all of that.
And speaking of sources, we've got some documents here that take a really fascinating angle on, well, a very famous myth, Hercules.
Everyone knows Hercules.
Right. You probably know the 12 labors. But what these texts argue, and this is where it gets interesting, is that the real symbolic meat isn't just in those famous tasks.
It goes beyond that. What's particularly striking is how this material treats the whole story, not just as history, not even just standard mythology.
Or like a code.
Yeah, like a coded spiritual curriculum almost. They look at Hercules himself less as a guy who lived, and more like a cipher, an initiate on a path.
A path with some serious challenges, obviously.
Yes.
Seeking wisdom.
Right. Intense challenges, self-mastery, all of it.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive, then, is to look past the usual stuff.
Yeah.
We're going to dig into what happens after the 12 labors. There's this final, less talked about trial.
Crucial trial.
Yeah. And we'll unpack how these sources see his whole journey, including that fiery ending as this big allegory. Transformation, purification, ascent, even.
Let's get into it. It's a different way of looking at him.
It really is. So most people think, okay, 12 labors done. Check. He did the impossible tasks, atoned for, the terrible things he did in madness.
Redemption achieved. Story over. Makes sense, right?
It seems logical. But these sources we have, they're very clear that's not the end of the symbolic narrative.
Not at all. He completes the labors, sure. He even goes back, settles down for a bit, remarries. There's this period that looks like, okay, peace at last.
The hero earned his rest. Finally.
You'd think. But according to these texts, he doesn't know it, but there's one last major challenge waiting.
Looming. Okay. What happens?
So he's traveling with his new wife, Deianira, and they run into this centaur, Nessus.
Ah, the centaur.
Yes. And in a, pretty dramatic moment, Nessus tries to abduct her. Hercules, ever the protector, shoots him with an arrow.
Standard hero stuff.
But here's the twist, the key detail. The arrow. It's tipped with the Hydra's venom.
Oh, wait. From one of the labors. The Lernaean Hydra.
Exactly. That potent, deadly poison he acquired during one of his earlier trials comes back into play right here.
Wow. Okay. That feels significant. Symbolically loaded, like you said. So Nessus is dying.
As he's dying, yeah. He cooks up this final, really nasty trick. He tells Deianira, hey, take my tunic. It's soaked in my blood.
Oh.
It's a powerful love charm. If Hercules ever looks like he might stray, just giving this. Cunning, right?
Very. And she believes him.
Later on, yeah. Maybe out of fear, maybe misplaced love, she gives Hercules the tunic. She has no idea. It's not just got the centaur's malice, but it's saturated with that lethal hydra poison.
And the moment Hercules puts it on,
Oh, boy.
immediate, unimaginable agony. The poison just burns into him. It's this horrific, relentless torment. Nothing can stop it.
And he can't just die.
That's the point the sources really emphasize. He's driven mad by the pain, ripping up trees, desperate for release. But as a demigod, he's trapped. Mortal means can't kill him. He's stuck in this state of pure suffering.
That's a nightmare. Trapped in agony, unable to find an end. How does he possibly get out of that?
Well, the sources say he ultimately accepts it. He orders a massive funeral pyre built for himself up on Mount Oeda.
He builds his own funeral pyre.
Or orders it built, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's presented not as like giving up in a conventional suicide sense. It's more like preparation for a different kind of ending.
Okay. So the pyre is lit. Sometimes a friend does it, sometimes maybe.
Oh, the details vary, but yeah. As the flames rise, that's when the divine part kicks in. Zeus, his father.
Exactly. Zeus sees his son suffering and, basically intervenes. He can't let him just perish like that.
So the fire, what does it do?
The fire consumes his mortal body, utterly. But this axe, this fiery dissolution, it's seen as separating his divine essence from the mortal suffering.
So the mortal part burns away.
And the divine part ascends, rises up to Mount Olympus.
Wow. Okay, so from this tormented figure on a mountaintop pyre, he becomes a god.
That's the core interpretation in these texts, yes. He arrives on Olympus. He's welcomed by the gods, granted immortality. He even marries Hebe, the goddess of youth.
Symbolizing rebirth, renewal.
Divine renewal, eternal vitality.
Yeah. So that final act, the purification by fire, leading to this transcendence, what are the sources saying that symbolizes in this whole initiatory framework?
They're pretty explicit about it. They say this final purification shows a really fundamental truth about the path. True transformation, real enlightenment. It needs more than just completing trials, winning victories like the 12 labors.
It needs sacrifice.
Profound sacrifice, yeah. Hercules did all the earthly tasks. He arguably earned his redemption. But he still had to face this final initiation, this ultimate surrender and transformation through fire.
And the sources stress that he faces it willingly. He doesn't fight it at the very end.
Not at all. They really highlight his agency. He prepares for the pyre. He understands, or at least the symbolic interpretation is that he understands that this kind of death isn't an end, it's a passage.
The threshold.
Sacred threshold, yeah, to a higher state. So his final moments aren't about fear, they're about readiness. He's met his fate, having kind of spiritually conquered the fear of it already.
And this readiness, this acceptance, they connect that to a bigger goal, like for anyone on this kind of path.
They absolutely do. They suggest that this state of acceptance, this readiness, might be the real objective, preparing ourselves for what comes next without fear.
That resonates with a lot of spiritual ideas, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The cyclical nature of things.
Definitely. And they even bring in an analogy from the tarot to make the point.
Old card.
The tower. They use the tower card.
Okay. Destruction of evil.
Right. As a reminder that sometimes once you've built your tower, maybe it's structure of understanding, a phase of life, an achievement, it has to come down.
Not just for the sake of it, though.
No, it's because the journey towards, let's say, true wisdom, it's never about building one single final thing that just stays there forever. It's not a straight climb up a ladder.
It's more like a cycle.
Exactly. They describe the quest for balance, for deeper understanding, as basically unending, a perpetual cycle. Birth, destruction, rebirth, each time maybe on a higher level.
And importantly, it's not about escaping suffering.
That's a key point they make. It's not about finding a way out of suffering. It's about moving through it, towards transcending it.
Okay, so let's bring this back to the idea of the myth being a coded curriculum. The sources are essentially saying the labors themselves are symbolic, right? Not just physical feats.
Absolutely. Underneath the heroic action, there's this whole other layer, this narrative of transformation, purification, and ascent.
So his trials, seen this way, are like initiations, stations on a path.
Like stations for an aspiring adept, yeah. And they demand way more than just muscle. They need cunning, restraint, strategy.
Sacrifice.
Sacrifice, yes. And this unwavering commitment to the path of light, or wisdom, as it's often called in these contexts.
And they draw a direct line to traditions like Freemasonry. How does that fit?
Well, they present Freemasonry itself as a symbolic journey, too.
Sure.
Full of allegory, ritual, hidden meanings.
Okay.
And its purpose, according to these interpretations, mirrors what we see in myths like Hercules, taking the rough ashlar, the unrefined stone, the sort of uninitiated person, and transforming it into the perfect ashlar.
Polishing the stone, refining the cells.
Wishing what's fallen, yeah. Awakening that potential within.
So the 12 labors become this series of lessons coded in symbols, maybe drawing on astrology, archetypes. And Hercules isn't just some Greek hero. He's a stand-in for the initiate.
A cipher for the initiate, yeah. Tasked with battling not just monsters outside, but the passions within, overcoming ignorance, ascending towards wisdom through trial after trial.
And it's crucial, you said, that this path isn't straightforward.
Definitely not linear. The sources stress this. It winds around. Sometimes it even feels like you go backwards, but it's always sacred.
And it doesn't always start with a win. Often starts with a fall, like Hercules' initial madness.
Often starts with tragedy, yeah. And it proceeds through intense trials, not ease. And the end goal isn't just winning in a worldly sense. It's about profound understanding, transcendence.
It really sounds like they're pushing back against reading this story superficially.
They are. They explicitly say, don't just read this as history or even just as a fun myth. Look at it like a mirror.
Mirror.
Because the labors of Hercules, seen through this symbolic lens, they aren't just telling his story. They're reflecting our story, our struggle.
Right. Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive then. We've really unpacked how these sources view the Hercules story way beyond the usual 12 labors.
Seeing it as this deep journey of transformation, right? Leading to that necessary fiery purification and ultimately a kind of symbolic ascent.
And we saw how they connect these ancient myths, using these symbolic lenses, to mirror paths of personal growth, like the journey in Freemasonry, from the rough stone to the perfect one.
From rough ashlar to perfect ashlar, yeah. It makes these ancient stories feel very immediate.
Which brings it back to you listening. The idea here from these sources is that these aren't just tales about some demigod long ago. They're potentially holding up a mirror to us.
Reflecting our own trials, our own search for meaning, for wisdom, and showing that the path isn't simple, it's cycles. Challenge, destruction, rebirth.
And that final image of Hercules, accepting his fate on the pyre, seeing death as a passage, not an end. The sources connect us to that big idea. Maybe the real goal is preparing ourselves to face what comes next without fear.
And thinking about that tower card analogy again, that sometimes things have to be destroyed for the journey to continue.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What does it mean in your own life to embrace that? That growth might need not just building and winning, but also destruction, letting go, accepting change, even chaos as part of the passage.
How do we move towards transcending suffering rather than just trying to escape it? That's a heavy thought to end on.
It is, but it seems to be at the heart of the interpretation these sources offer. Moving through, not just away from.